there, REMPCs. Welcome to Rules of Cool, where we interview very special guests, creators, gamers, designers, and world builders. I'm your host, Rem, and today we're talking with urban fantasy and space opera writer, Rhiannon Held. Stay tuned because you won't want to miss it. She has also donated tonight's giveaway, which is a free PDF of her Idyllian space opera series. Type hashtag REMPC in the chat for your free entry to win. And don't forget that you can get bonus entries by subscribing and donating bits through the Twitch chat. Every 100 bits gets you a bonus entry, and subscribing gets you 7 whole bonus entries. We also invite you to join us on Discord. The Rem Alternus server is an inclusive and supportive community of gamers. Our favorite channels include Pun, Joke, and Meme, Goose Goose Duck Saturday Gaming, and support and encouragement for when you just need a little extra kindness. We hold casting calls to join our streams on the Master of Rem Twitch channel, a Learn to Play D&D program, a monthly trivia night, and more. So please check it out at the link in the chat, and welcome to the community. Subversion, the new cyberpunk fantasy TTRPG by Fragging Unicorns Games, is coming soon to Kickstarter. Build your community and subvert authority at every turn in this gritty Neo-Babylon setting. Follow the project now before it goes live at the link in the chat. Now, time to get right into our conversation for this week, so stay tuned, REMPCs. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to my special guest today, Rhiannon Held. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Good.
Good. I'm so excited to talk to you. I love doing my research, and I love having authors. It's like I'm a total fangirl for writers. Like I just want to dig into different worlds and different stories. So I'm very excited to talk to you.
Thank you.
But I have to say, my first question before we get into writing is I love to ask all of my guests, what is your history as a gamer?
Sure. Well, and that one I think is probably the more interesting answer for me because writing, I'm like, oh, well, when I was a little kid and I can't remember and blah, blah, blah. But I came to gaming a little bit later than I think some people did. I remember back in the day when I was growing up, there was the residual aspects of the sort of satanic panic. And so the first time I heard of TTRPGs was there was a summer camp and they disallowed them. And I don't really understand what was behind that at the time. This was probably in the mid or late 90s. But I was like, I think it's like when they talk about drug programs and the kids are like, wow, that sounds interesting. I should try some of that. I was like, those sound kind of cool.
I was thinking that too when you said it. I was like, man, if at a summer camp they told me not to do something, then I would immediately research it and want to like see why.
Yeah, exactly. So high school was where I started having friends who were GMs. I think the first one that I played was actually an anime-inspired one called Big Eyes Small Mouth. Rather than D&D, but then I got into D&D in college because it was a great way to meet people and form community. And I also got into LARPing at that time. LARPing proved not to be for me, but I do still have a soft spot in my heart for World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade was the one I was in. Even if I'm not good at LARPing, I'm like, that was a fun system. I'm just not extroverted enough for this.
Fair. Awesome. So that kind of might already answer the next question, but maybe not, which is where did you first discover your love of sci-fi and fantasy?
Oh, well, I mean, that one goes back a fair long ways. I think the first book that I can point to is Patricia C. Reed had the Dealing with Dragon series. And when I was growing up, YA as a genre didn't exist. And so you had the kids' books, and then you had the juvenile section at the library, which was all Nancy Drew and Boxcar Children. So I read a heck of a lot of Nancy Drew, and I read a heck of a lot of Boxcar Children.
Same though.
And then you graduated to adult. And so Patricia C. Reed came out around that time, and I was like, dragons and fantasy, and this is fun. And I think my gateway to fantasy in the adult realm was Mercedes Lackey. And it really hit the sweet spot as far as like talking horses and like lots of feelings and people who are like helping each other out and like cool telepathy. And so that was just like, that was my catnip as a sort of tween, I guess. And then Anne McCaffrey was my gateway for sci-fi. Because like it's easy to start with Pern, and Pern is fantasy-ish, and then it's sort of also sci-fi. And then you can then step into Anne McCaffrey's like fully sci-fi stuff and then start expanding from there. So
truth. Awesome. So you had gaming around you as kind of an older kid, as a young kid. You had sci-fi and fantasy introduced to you. So when did you first pick up the pen and start writing?
That was, and in this I'm late compared to some people again, because I feel like a lot of writers will have these stories about how they were writing their first when they were 4 years old or, whatever. And I certainly had the creativity and the impulses to tell stories to myself. But I was probably 16 when I actually sat down and like thought I will go somewhere with this that's not just like a school assignment. I'm kind of happy to have done that because I know that when it's a part of the natural growing process that you mix together what you've already read. And so you have your Pokemon go to Pern or, that kind of thing. And so I did that in my head. And then by the time I was writing stuff down, then I felt like I sort of processed it a little bit more. And so that was when I did start immediately with original stuff. Not to say that fan fiction there's anything like lesser or that you would be younger when you were doing that. But also when I was sort of starting to write around 16, 15, 16, fan fiction wasn't as big. Like the internet was starting to like get bigger and people were starting to find each other in fan fiction communities at that time. And I think if I was, 15 or 16 now, I definitely, if not writing fan fiction, would be in those communities because I think they're so welcoming and helping each other out, whether it's original fiction or the fan fiction.
Awesome. Cool. So I found some links on one of your pages to the Odyssey Writing Workshop and the SFWA, or Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. So what is your connection to these organizations?
So I'm alumnus of the Odyssey Writing Workshop, and then I'm a member of SFWA, is how they say it.
SFWA?
SFWA, yes.
Huh, I've never heard that. And I like how it's two F's because it's fiction and fantasy. So I sat there staring at it for a while thinking, Safafwa.
Yeah. Well, they just it's an I have a book that my parents excavated from their like garage from 1976, published by SFWA, How to Be a Science Fiction Writer. And I was like asking my parents about it. And if you go far enough back, like fantasy wasn't really a genre that people talked about very much. It was just all science fiction. And so they got their name from back then. So it's the SF is the science fiction, but now it's science fiction and fantasy. And I think they just changed to be from Writers of America to Writers Association because they've been growing more and more sort of international over time. So I have been a member since I was first traditionally published. So that was 2010.
Okay.
So I've been with the organization for a while and I've seen it grow and change. And I've been really impressed by the kind of changes that they've made because they're really working to be there for indie authors. They changed their entry requirements. It used to be that you needed to have a contract with an advance of X amount, or different contracts that added up to an advance or something like that, number of short stories. And that was really onerous for people who were indie publishing with no advance, or small presses with small advances. So they changed it to, you need writing income of a certain amount. So that writing income can be from the money from your Kickstarter that can go to expenses. It can be royalties from you selling yourself on one of the big platforms. It can be just all kinds of stuff. It can be for game writing. It can be money that you work for hire for writing for a game or for whatever else. And so I've been really happy to sort of be there for those changes. And I guess, like, I mean, I'm talking sideways. SIFWA, what they're doing is they try to support authors in terms of sample contracts. They have legal help. They have a grant fund for emergency medical expenses. They have grievance arbitration. They've been doing stuff like when Disney wasn't paying authors royalties, SIFWA was behind the sort of press to get Disney to pay. Disney must pay.
Cool.
And they're still doing that. So I really like that they are so supportive of writers. And when you need a big organization, like an organization that can put pressure and find the legal representation and all that sort of thing, when you're just one small person, like, I really believe in that. And people, I think, sometimes have an impression of them that's from the days when it was all traditionally published writers and it was a lot of like old white dudes. And all the time they're trying to get better than that. And I think that the more that other people join, the more those other people can get on committees and like speak up and say what they need to do to get better. And I think that they're definitely, like, they're not there yet, but they're definitely getting there. So I really believe in their mission. And then Odyssey, the workshop, is a bit like Clarion or Clarion West. It used to be, actually, it's changed. I was talking about that the other day. It used to be a residential 6 weeks. You go, you have a class, you learn intensively, you all critique each other's work. And so like Clarion or Clarion West. And now they've shifted it. Since the pandemic, obviously, they had to go online. And so they went online with a group, and then they actually, either, I think last year, they totally revamped it because, it's a big barrier to be able to take the time off work and family to intensively, a bunch of hours every day, be doing something for 6 weeks. And a lot of people can't do that.
Right.
And so they are doing personal Odyssey now, which is, it's a one-to-one. Jean Cavellos is the instructor, and she runs Odyssey. And she will do sort of different programs you can choose. You can have it like happen over 6 months. It's like 6 weeks of instruction, but it's happening over 6 months. Mm-hmm. And she works with people personally, and she does instruction and critiques their work and just like makes it really personalized to them and what she sees, that areas where they were need improvement. And so it's sort of like, it's a master class because you're getting all her instruction. And then also she is looking at your work. And she's also, the one thing that they can't replicate is that in Odyssey, we'd all read each other's work. So you were having a lot of people read your work, and you were reading a lot of other people's work. So what they do to try to replicate that is that I actually donated some of my old manuscripts. They have the people who take the Odyssey now look at sort of old drafts of people's stories and novels and see if they see the same sort of things that were brought up at the time. And so they get the learning aspect of, and I will say this personally, there's nothing like seeing a weakness that you have in somebody else to crystallize it. So you're like, oh, I see. Yeah, that's real annoying. I'm going to stop doing that now. So you still get that aspect
Self-awareness
of
through
it.
others.
Yeah, exactly. So the one thing that they can't get that you sort of would have to get on your own is that I think it's also a skill to be able to take critique and then decide if it is right for you.
Mhm.
Um, because with a big class, you have all kinds of different people and all kinds of different perspectives, and maybe they read a lot of romance, and so they are saying, if this was a romance, you would want to do XYZ, and you're like, well, it's not a romance, so I probably am not going to do XYZ.
Right.
And that's a skill you have to build up over time. But certainly, like if you have a critique group or a bunch of trusted beta readers or that sort of thing, you can like get that skill through time. So
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like this, like I said, self-awareness that it kind of brings up. Because that's hard to do sometimes, right? Like, and just being a person and growing as a human being and stuff, you get feedback from people all the time. And to be able to separate the personal feelings from that and say, like, where is the truth in this? And what do I actually want to take ownership of and change about myself? That's huge. So seeing that in a microcosm um, of writers, like that's really neat. Skill to practice and muscle to flex. Neat.
yeah.
Cool. All right. So not only are you passionate about writing and science fiction and fantasy, but you have a career in science reality. And I'm so excited to talk about this. Tell us about your career in archaeology.
Okay. So I will start out with a couple sort of like uh, definitional kind of things. I do what's called, or some people call compliance archaeology. And what that is it's not academic archaeology where you're sort of like, well, I want to find out an answer to a particular question, or this is a site that seems like it has a lot of information. I'm going to go out and find a site that answers this question, or I'm going to excavate this site to see what it can tell us. Um, Compliance archaeology is all about making sure that we don't harm what are called cultural resources. And I used to work for a company that was a small company that did just compliance archaeology, and now they were bought up by a larger firm that does environmental compliance. So as well as the archaeology piece, they do wetlands and birds and air quality and noise and basically when there's a construction project or a development project, there are laws in place that they have to consider like, is this going to harm the environment? Is it going to harm natural resources, cultural resources? Is it going to harm people? Um, and they have to, you may in the news have come across something called an EIS, which is an environmental impact statement. And they're big and they're long and they're super technical. And I think that they can be a little bit scary to people. But the important part, I think, about them is that you have to go out and look and see what's there and sort of extrapolate and think about what might happen to it if your development goes forward. And I think that is such an important process. So the compliance archaeology part of that is that if, for instance, your town needs a new sewage treatment plant. Now, if it was like a shopping mall or something, it's like, do we really need that? Do we want to keep the land wild, et cetera? Like, you need that sewage treatment plant. Like, when it overflows, like it's killing fish from in the rivers, like you need the sewage treatment plant. So we're going to build a sewage treatment plant. And so they have a parcel of land picked out in mind. And so the company I work for, their job is to go in and for the archaeology is to see if there's any archaeology there. Is there maybe a Native American site? Is there a historic sort of Euro-American site there? And you can do things like pedestrian survey, which is walking, looking at the ground. You can do shovel probes, which are sort of 30 centimeters. I can't do that with my hands anymore. I used to be able to when I was digging them. That go down and see if there's anything under the ground, which I'm in the Pacific Northwest. It's all vegetation. So if you're walking, like you can't see anything on the ground. Pedestrian survey only is mostly in sort of the American Southwest. because it's, rocky and sandy and you would see
Right.
things on the ground. And people ask, well, do you like finding things? What do you want to find? And the answer is actually, we don't want to find things, because if we go out and we walk around and we dig some holes and there's nothing there, then great. They can build their sewage treatment plant. It's not going to destroy anything, and everybody is happy. And even when we do find something, we tend to treat it much more in terms of, well, so we found something here, and so you're going to have your building here and your parking lot there. Can we switch them? So then whatever is here is just getting paved over, and it will continue to stay there and be perfectly happy and cool. And then your building, where you're building the foundation and digging down, that'll be on a place where there isn't a site. And awesome. Again, we get a sewage treatment plant, everybody's happy. And so we love to have negative results. We do find things. And there does sometimes end up being clashes where, the client is like, well, do we really have to? And we say, yes, you really do have to. It's called mitigation. And that's the other thing, is everybody imagines that if we do find something, that it'll be like amazing and cool and huge, and like we got to get in there and we got to excavate it. We find stuff all the time, and sometimes it's not really important. And the reason that we are hired and we're experts and go to school for so long is to know what's important and what's not. And so we find something, we say, well, this is pretty common. There are a lot of them in the area. Can scatters. A lot of times you'll see, and the rule of thumb is that 50 years old is the cutoff where you have to at least take a look at it. So it's older than 50 years old, but now that means 1972. Which is a crazy idea, right?
Don't say that. I don't like
that. We will often find when we're going along, say, a rural highway, that there's a scatter of cans, and they are food cans, maybe beer cans. So some beer cans, some tuna fish cans from 1960. And clearly somebody ate at their house or was eating on the road, and they threw them out of their window. And because of the wind, a bunch of people did that. And so you have say 30 cans that are all in sort of a depression in the ground. That is a site. However, that is not a site that we would necessarily protect.
Right.
And so we would gather all the data. We would count the cans. We'd say, are these the usual kinds of cans? Is there anything unusual about them? But then at that point, we don't need to continue to protect it. Yeah. We don't need to send those cans from 1960 to a museum.
Thank you.
Museums, they have limited space, and so we want to use it for the important things. So a lot of our job is, once we do find something, recommending hey, we think that we are going to just write down everything that's in this, and that'll be enough. We think that maybe we'll do a little bit of sampling excavation, but then you'll pave over it, and that'll be enough. For buildings, often we do plans and photographs and a whole thing of research. So you basically build this sort of huge binder or bound book about this building that you're going to have to tear down, and then you do go ahead and tear it down. And so the archaeology aspect of it is so much looking and deciding importance and then problem solving, rather than sort of just going out and purely trying to find things and then trying to, write up a cool book about, this new site that you found.
So what's the coolest thing you've found?
Let's see. I will keep myself not too adult, because there was a site that it was in a railroad town, So there were artifacts from as early as sort of 1890, because this is out sort of in Washington State, so it's in the West, nothing too old except for Native American. And so 1890 up until sort of like the 1940s. And what people did a lot of times was they would have outdoor privies, and you just threw your garbage in there. And then later on, the waste has all decayed by then. Everybody's like, ugh. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's dirt by now.
Yeah.
What you get when you come along later is that they've taken their outhouse away because they got plumbing, and so they've just like covered over in the yard. But if you go and dig it up, you get this like long column of broken artifacts because it's their trash. Like they break a plate and then they toss it in the privy, and then they break a bottle and they toss it in the privy. And so I think I personally, I need to be able to identify a lot of things, but I think my biggest interest is in historic archaeology versus what's called pre-contact archaeology. Sometimes people said prehistoric, but it's not like Native people didn't have history. It was just oral history.
Yeah.
And so we say pre-contact with Europeans, so pre-contact peoples.
Right.
So I like historic artifacts, just they interest me. And so at my company, when it was a small company, there were a couple towns that had sort of a biggish area where we had a bunch of different privies. And so you could sort of see through time. And we were near the old hotel. So there was a lot of really plain, boring white plates and stuff, because it's just basic what's called hotel ware. Not decorated at all. They just get it out there. People break it all the time. They get new stuff. They break it again. And then there were brothels. And there are some artifacts that I don't think I can describe in detail that were related to the brothels.
Oh my God, I'm going to message you about this on the show and be like, okay, so full details now. We're not on a PG show anymore. How neat. Oh, cool. So that's your favorite find?
Yeah. And then the other stuff was that there was a site, and I can't really say where it was, but it was also in sort of a city's old town. And it was in the area where not that the city had a Chinatown, but there were a lot of people from China living there.
Yeah.
And so it has all of these artifacts that are related to Chinese people. And it had a few Japanese artifacts, but so many Chinese artifacts. And that's one of the things that I really like about archaeology, because people will say, well, when you get to historic times, it was written down. And I'm like, yes, the white European or Euro-American men wrote about their lives. Anybody else, we can find out more when we actually dig up what they were living like. And so that site, we can find sort of what teacups and bowls the Chinese people at that time were using. Cool. Because they were living in that area and they had, discarded the broken ones. And so that was really awesome to see.
Oh, how cool. Oh, I have 15 more questions I want to ask you, but we're here to talk about books.
Sure.
So I'll stop now. I'll stop myself, but that was really fun for me. So thank you. So switching to your, from one career to another career that you have in writing, tell us a little bit about the Amsterdam series.
Okay.
Amsterdam Institute, right?
Amsterdam Institute, yeah.
Okay.
Well, there is a little bit of archaeology in it. So the Amsterdam Institute series wouldn't necessarily, there's not an archaeologist character, but it underpins the whole series, because the Amsterdam Institute series is a space opera series. And it's about a couple of different protagonists over time. So each protagonist has 2 novellas that's about her.
Oh, cool.
And so thematically, sort of for the character wise, it's about technology so there's stuff like brain implants and nanites, and one of the protagonist has like sort of wings that she can kind of glide with, and like muscle enhancements. And each of the people had these installed on them without their consent. And so it's thinking about when you have something that's augmenting you, or implants or nanites, what's your self-identity then? And especially the first protagonist, she was in the resistance fighting super soldiers who were trying to conquer her planet, and she was infected with the super soldiers nanite package. So now she has their super strength and their like calm system in her head and all this sort of stuff, and she doesn't know like what she wants to be now, right? Because her people are looking at her like she's a collaborator, but she doesn't want to be a collaborator. But like she's sort of hooked into the super soldiers comm system, so can she use that to like release a virus to like disable them or something like that? And does she want to be a spy? Or like, so it's all about self-identity in the face of technology. If technology is changing you, how do you feel about that? Are you still you? How do you incorporate it into your identity? And then the world building, on the other hand, is where the archaeology comes in, because having the different protagonists, I jump them ahead through time. So we're looking at these cultures sort of over the long haul. There's like a couple 100 years on one jump and like a couple 100 years in the other jump. And I loved being able to play with the idea that empires rise and fall, or the like scrappy rebels are now a big empire, like a couple generations later. And it really just interests me to look at not only do things change over time, but how people's conception of things changes over time. The characters in the first couple novellas they are known by the later novellas, but they're known as sort of like heroic figures, where the story has been kind of misremembered. And that is, I think, one of the things that I love most about world building is imperfect memory. Because if it's anything that as an archaeologist, working as an archaeologist has taught me, is that we forget. We forget because people die. We forget because of propaganda. We forget because, we have no sort of need for a particular kind of myth anymore. It doesn't mean anything to us in the modern day, so we forget about it when it was meaningful to people before. And then, like, if we try to get it back, then often we're wrong. Like the Victorians, when they were doing archaeology of Viking or Norse sites, were often like wildly wrong about like gender roles and whatever, because they were so steeped in their own gender roles that they saw it in other people. And so we're now trying to undo some of that with looking at various, relooking at Viking or Norse sites and that sort of thing.
Can you start a podcast, please? I'll just listen to you talk about archaeology all day.
So to bring it back to the books, what I want to have is an adventure. Like the protagonists, they have this technology, people are after them, they're trying to be a spy, like they're doing all this stuff, and then they figure out where in life they want to land. But meanwhile, in the background, like if you're paying attention, you can get that little bit of like, oh, she's talking about the protagonist of the last book, but that's wrong. Like,
cool.
They've forgotten.
Yeah, so. I really like that. I can't remember who I was talking to recently. It was in the last couple days. And they said, I don't know if this is a official quote from somewhere, but something about the difference between truth and fact, where, truth is there's facts. Facts are facts, but truth is someone's memory of a fact or someone's perspective of a fact. And even though truth itself stands for so much, it doesn't. So that's really neat that you can build that in and write to different biases. So even when you're writing about facts that have happened in the previous books, that someone's truth about those facts are different. I really like that. Neat. Cool. Now, most of this series is available as a collection, which you've donated for this show. So tell us what comes in the Idyllians collection while everyone types hashtag RemPC in the chat for their free entry to win.
So the Idyllian collection is the first 4. So that's Genevieve is the first 2 novellas. And because of the cultural stuff I was trying to do, her name is Amsterdam Genevieve. And she founds the Amsterdam Institute. Okay. So that's sort of what ties the rest of it together, because this happened to Genevieve and she wants to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. And so Sienna needs to go to the Institute and get help later in her stories. And so 3 and 4 are Sienna. And Idyllian, the name of the planet that they're on is Idle. Okay. And so it's sort of based around the idea that Idle is trying to stay neutral with the big sort of empires growing on either side. In Genevieve's time, there's only one. In Sienna's time, you're starting to get 2. And so I was talking about the sort of time jumps in the culture, that sort of thing. In the collection, you get the first 2 of those. Okay. And then if you want the third one, novellas 5 and 6, then those 2 are in ebooks. The 6th one is coming out soon. I haven't set a date yet, but cool. So then it'll be a full, complete set of 3 protagonists with the jumps in between.
Awesome. Awesome. And so there will be 6 books in total of the Amsterdam Institute or the Idyllian?
The Amsterdam Institute.
Okay, so of these 6 books, 4 of them are available in the Idyllian collection. And then is there more? Are you writing more for Amsterdam?
We'll see. Okay. I always sort of want to come to a stopping point and not end on a cliffhanger or whatever. And so 5 and 6 is a stopping point for now. Okay. And I'm working on some other stuff. And so I never say never that I would come back and write like 7 or 8 since I've got that pattern going. But I'm looking at going back towards maybe traditional publishing if I can. Okay. So I have a standalone for now space opera novel rather than novella that I'm hoping to go somewhere with. But of course, unfortunately for people reading my stuff, that means the period of being quiet, because I'm working on this and I'm trying to get it to agents and publishers or whatever. And meanwhile, I don't have the bandwidth to be releasing stuff, which makes me sad, but it's unfortunate. Totally. I do have the day job.
Yeah. It's hard to look at the ground while you are writing your novel. And
yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, but that's not all that you have, though. Amsterdam Institute isn't it. You also have the Silver Universe novels. So tell us about those.
Yeah. So those were the first 3 were traditionally published. And then they didn't pick up the rest. So 4 and 5 finish out that series. Okay. And then 6 is a collection of some related short fiction and then a couple of novellas that are about an archaeologist. So if you would like to read an archaeologist writing about archaeology of werewolves, then pick up my Lady's Children collection.
I do not have anything to write with right now. I will rewatch the episode because apparently that's where I need to start.
And it's a good place to start because the archaeologist character is meeting the characters who were in the main series for the first time. So you can meet them along with her. You don't need to know anything about the past series. Awesome. So the main series, the 5 books, are about Silver, and then Andrew Dare, who's a descendant of the Roanoke colony Dares. And what I tried to do with that, again, with the world building and the archaeology and whatever, is I have only werewolf well, actually, I guess that a human character has a POV in a later book, but in the beginning book, we only have werewolf point of view characters, which at the time, 2010 was when this was coming out, was a little bit more kind of unusual in terms of not having kind of a character who's finding out for the first time. I just threw everybody in, and they're werewolves, and they know they're werewolves, and they're species. So they're not turned by a bite. So that means that as a species, they have their own history, they have their own religion, they have their own ideas about like where werewolves first came from, and where they spread over the world. And so they have all this sort of like, I call it anthropological werewolves, werewolf culture. And again, that's the world building and what's actually happening sort of in the forefront is that oh shoot, my computer is freaking out. I hope that isn't disrupting my Zoom at all.
We've got you so far. You're doing great.
Good. Good. The silver is injected with silver nitrate, and it means that she loses use of her arm, and then she gets some brain damage, and so she has visions, and she interprets those as visions from their goddess, the lady. And Andrew Dare finds her when she's sort of like trying to run from the person who did this to her, and she doesn't really know who he is, and so she can't point out of the werewolves to go like take care of him. And Andrew Dare is a staunch atheist, and so he's like, those visions are because of brain damage. That's all. And so the sort of spark and friction between them is that Silver is seeing the world in terms of the lady, and also Silver sees Death, who in their religion is occurs as a big black wolf, and he's very snarky. As far as like fan favorites of characters, like Death is, I think, the most favorite. And then Andrew having to sort of deal with this, and what does he think about the religion of his upbringing, and while he's trying to help Silver like track down the person who did this to her so that he doesn't hurt anybody else. And then once that's taken care of in the first book, in the later books, they start taking over the packs in North America to try to make sure that nobody can ever sort of hurt werewolves that way again, because with werewolves being so fractured, they are easy to kind of pick off packs one by one kind of thing. And so Andrew and Silver go on to be alphas, which is not really a spoiler, because you can sort of suspect that that's what they're going to be able to do, to bring werewolves together.
Okay, cool. So we go from the space opera to werewolves and archaeology. I love that it's science fiction with the capital science. Makes me happy. So then what is Mirrorbound?
So Mirrorbound and Hound and Key are my two standalone urban fantasy novels, and I'll do them at the same time since they're both standalones. And they were, after the Silver series, I was sort of experimenting with different aspects of urban fantasy, because urban fantasy, even at that time, was becoming very sort of like ossified and regimented in terms of you tended to have certain types of characters, certain types of love interests, certain types of plots, that sort of thing. And I was trying to play with it and see what readers would react to and that sort of thing. So Hound and Key is about a magic that is passed down from a group of 5 people called the Hand of the Gods, who have existed over time, and then they're reborn. And sometimes they are reborn with different levels of memories. And that one was playing with sort of oral traditions and legends and myths, and then getting into fairy tales, because they've been all over the world and they've been different places, and they've been sort of have that fairy tale aspect of them. But then now they're reborn in the modern times, And so they have this magic, and some of them sort of don't know anything about their background. And one of them is trying to take control of all of them. And so that there's that aspect to it. And then Mirrorbound, you can see, the sort of themes that I try to play with a little bit. Mirrorbound is the protagonist is what's called a phantom, who would normally live in the mirror realm, which is sort of a realm parallel to the regular world. And so human mages have been going over to the mirror realm. So mirror realm sent somebody back sort of as a fact-finding mission. And the human mages freaked out and bound her there. And phantoms are sort of, they're human-ish, but they can change their sex, and they can change their appearance to a certain degree, and things like that. And so she's bound just with one appearance, just with one gender, and she's looking for a way to get home. But meanwhile, she's been starting to make friends. And so she has this sort of push-pull of, kind of these people are her enemies. And they're definitely her enemies when she finds out that the mages are trying to maybe get to the mirror round and start like stealing its magic.
Yeah.
But these people, she's lived with them so long, they've become her friends, and she definitely wants to like save her friends. And so she has those sort of those hard choices to make.
Cool.
And I did in Mirrorbound have a little bit of fun trying to poke fun at some of the most tropey tropes in urban fantasy of the female protagonist, and she's got like 2 or 3 guys on the string, and she can't decide, and she falls into bed with all of them at various times, and she's fighting monsters, but she can't pay her rent, and like all that. That is not the protagonist. That is the protagonist's friend. So we're watching what would normally be the protagonist of an urban fantasy series at that time through the eyes of her friend, who's like, please pay her rent. Please just pick one of your boyfriends.
Awesome. I love that. Oh, that's really funny. And I love that it's all in one standalone novel instead of like the Stephanie Plum series, where it's like, let's find out who she's going to fall into bed with, but you have to read 15 novels before that happens. And
yeah.
Nothing wrong if you are a Stephanie Plum fan, but oh man. Awesome. All right. So we are getting close to the top of the hour. So I do want to give you time to talk about where to follow you. So let's wrap up with one more question. Any other ventures that you're working on that you'd like to share with us? Like maybe a archaeology podcast that's in the works?
Let's see. I am part of the Dungeon Scrawlers actual play stream.
Cool.
And we're going we had a campaign that was a couple years, and so I can't talk about my character on that because she's not going to be around for more than a couple months now. But we're looking where we're going to go with that. So we're definitely going to have a longer term campaign again. And the thing about the Dungeon Scrawlers stream is that we're all authors. So the idea is that this is not just another D&D actual play, but it's a D&D actual play of authors and how they would do characters and plot development and all that sort of thing. So I'm a part of that. And then as I sort of introed earlier, I'm probably going to go a little quieter on the writing front while I am shopping a traditionally published novel to agents and then hopefully publishers. And then I definitely still do have short fiction that's out there. I like doing a post-apocalyptic world with various stories in it because that again shows what people might do archaeology of us. And so
whoa! I like that. It took me a minute for that to like really settle.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So 300 years from now, what would someone find in your backyard?
Hopefully not cans of tuna mixed with poop that is now mud and broken plates. Hopefully I'm a little more interesting than that. But
yeah. So those are places like Beneath Ceaseless Skies is an online magazine that has several of my stories.
Cool.
And Zombies Need Brains does themed anthologies. And I've had some stories in those. And fingers crossed, maybe in some later ones as well. But Zombies Need Brains does great anthologies anyway. Not just about zombies. Sometimes I have to tell people that. I'm like, no. It's all different science fiction and fantasy topics.
Cool.
So you can look for me in those.
Awesome. Well, gosh, it's great to hear. And as you have more discoveries and as you have hopefully you find your agent, your publisher, and we get more, and we'll have you back on down the line. But it's been really wonderful talking with you. Where can people find you and your community to follow all that you've done and all that's to come?
So I am continuing to be for now on Twitter at Rhiannon Held. I'm on the Dungeon Scholars Discord, and which is, I think, the place I most hang out, just to chat. And my website, rhiannonheld.com, has sort of, announcements and that sort of thing. So, and the Dungeon Scholars actual play, sometimes we have guests, so it's not every single week, but those are, or I'm not there every single week. Those are Wednesdays at 6:30 Pacific time on the Dungeon Scholars Twitch channel. So you can always find me there, and sometimes I can be in the chat. So
cool. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to order all of these books myself and get started. I swear I gotta stop having authors on the show because my to read list is it's I'm gonna need to tell my husband I need another bookshelf just for stuff that I need to read. So but thank you so much. And for you REM PCs, don't go anywhere. We will be back in just a moment. It's never a milk run in the sixth world. It was supposed to be a simple job, but a few hours of surveillance at the eye of the needle looks as if another faction wants to disrupt the business meeting altogether. Now, with a raging firefight blocking the elevators, the team needs a new escape plan, exit vector. Stay tuned for the one-shot show featuring Shadowrun and the world premiere of Exit Vector by Vector Tridents, which is an aerial combat minis game, coming next on Gen Con TV. Don't forget that we have a wonderful giveaway of the ebook series of the Idyllian collection from the Amsterdam Institute. This is a lot of syllables for me. This is the series by Rhiannon Held. Thank you so much to Rhiannon for donating such a cool prize. Type hashtag RemPC in the chat right now for your free entry to win. And don't forget to get bonus entries and impact the game by donating bits and subs in chat. All funds help us to pay our cast and crew and keep producing content. You can also pick up t-shirts and merch at our Etsy store at www.remalternus.com/Etsy. And did you know we have more shows like Shadowrun Emerald Glitch and the One Shot Show on our Twitch channel? We stream 5 to 6 days a week over at twitch.tv/masterofrem, including the Dresden Files RPG, Shadowrun 5th Edition, Steampunk Fantasy D&D, and more. So check us out and give us a follow. Thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time, REM PCs. Bye.